Hello, everybody. We're back for another podcast version of The Late Whistle. This will be the second version of this. The first podcast, we talked a little bit about who I was excited for to watch in Summer League this season. And I was thinking about doing a sort of recap on that and what came out of those players in Summer League, but wanted to try something a bit different here today. Adam Silver, at the end of Summer League, held a press conference talking about the state of the league and where he sees it going in different directions. And obviously, he is the spokesperson for the NBA on these matters and can only say so much. And sometimes there's some jargon in there where he's trying to let out some things, but maybe there's a different thing going on behind the scenes. So I took a look through that, watched the press conference twice now, took some notes on what he was talking about and what I see and how I see things differently than him in some aspects. This could go in many different directions here. I actually recorded this podcast yesterday, but the microphone was not working. And let me make sure that it looks like it is right now, so hopefully it will be good. But it went in a very different direction. I ended up mostly just talking about what I think about different issues that are going on in the NBA right now, rather than looking at it from Adam Silver's perspective. And I think that's a bit more interesting because able to put my own seasoning on it instead of just listing what he said. I'm not going to touch on everything he talked about in that 40-minute press conference. There's a lot of different questions asked, all quite interesting in their own right, but there's some specific things that I have more not serious, but some greater opinions on, and I'd like to discuss here. So, to start it off, I knew little to nothing about this whole NBA Europe initiative before listening to this press conference. I knew that the NBA wanted to expand their footprint in Europe. We've seen games all over the world during I believe, the preseason and then also at the beginning of the regular season, getting games in big centers. If France is going to have one, it's likely going to be the San Antonio Spurs, and I believe there's a game like that this year. I don't know if it's in France, but I'm pretty sure the Spurs are playing in that game. Maybe England. Similar things in other areas. If there happened to be a game go to Serbia, it would be likely that Nikola Jokic would be participating in that. And for the NBA from a business aspect, it totally makes sense. It's a very underserved market, not for basketball, but for NBA caliber and the way that the NBA is run. For that sort of system to be in Europe, there's definitely some questions on if the NBA should even move into this different market that already has proven leagues. But the NBA sees a business opportunity and they want to capitalize on it. So, what we learned, or what I learned from this press conference, really was that the NBA Europe, which is going to be a new league, it's going to consist of 12 permanent teams. And the plan is to have 4 teams that have to earn their way into the league on an annual basis, similar to how relegation and promotion works in European soccer. And I have my intermediate men's league soccer jersey on right now because I'm about to go to a game. But that doesn't really matter in this conversation. It's interesting to see how these negotiations are going because there is the Euro League, and that's going to be a big competitor for the NBA. And from what I understand, the NBA has been in conversations with the Euro League to find an agreement where there can be a merger of sorts and there can be one top league in Europe that the NBA will have their hand in. It seems like both sides have things that they want out of this. They're not that close to an agreement, and both teams are very willing for 2027 and who knows how long to go their separate ways and have their own leagues. But what makes this whole thing interesting is that the cities that the NBA are looking at are, I can't remember the exact cities, but there's two in England, there's two in France, there are two in Germany, there are two in Italy, there's one in Greece, one in Turkey, and I can't remember what the last country is, but then there's two in that one. So that rounds it out at 12. And then does it? I'm not going to go back into that, but England, France, Germany, Italy each have two teams. Another country has two teams, and then Turkey and Greece. So they're already building some rivalry in there within the country to have your rival, but then if you're going against other teams, it becomes a national thing. It's going to be a quite cool idea. But my main point about this is that the teams in Spain in particular, I believe it's Barcelona and Madrid, who already have EuroLeague teams right now. And there's been multiple groups from each of these cities put in bids, or at least proposals for what the situation would sort of look like if they were to be the owner. And it very likely could be the same. It is the same ownership that owns Barcelona's basketball club or Madrid's basketball club. So if they were to move over to the NBA, what then happens to the EuroLeague? It likely gets watered down in talent, and it's not going to be seen as much of a EuroLeague, and the NBA version of it will be seeming like the top version of basketball. So I see this ending in a way that the EuroLeague compromises in some sense, where they can still stay involved with the league, and that there will be a merger with the NBA. And I think that the NBA's terms will be closer to what it ends up being, although there will be some sort of compromise in the middle. But it's interesting to think about how this is going to change the basketball world. There's going to be a lot more media coverage of European basketball in North America. I'm not up to date on the EuroLeague by any means. I don't know what the media coverage is like in Europe, but I don't see much here in Canada. So it'll be exciting to see these borderline NBA guys be in this NBA Europe League, and we can hear about them and what their stories are like, and is there any chance that they make it back into the NBA. That's also interesting for the G League, or if there's a sort of pipeline where you can play in Europe for, I expect, more money. Are players going to even want to play in the G League as a way to get into the NBA, because there's going to be so much coverage of you in Europe and there's such tight ties to the NBA? Is that going to become the new feeder league? I don't know. But it's interesting to think about, and Silver seems to think that they are on for October 2027. The league looks like it's going to be at the similar time to the NBA. It would have been cool to see it happen during the offseason, but maybe an offseason in basketball is good, and it makes you enjoy and appreciate the pretty long season that we have even more. That's it for NBA Europe, but quite similarly, uh, NBA Europe isn't expansion of the NBA, but Adam Silver has talked about wanting to expand into both Seattle and Las Vegas, and particularly where this press conference took place in Las Vegas during Summer League. He talked a lot about whatever team would be there. There's been a number of different groups that have come out publicly saying that they want to own the team in Las Vegas. The other major sports, like hockey in particular, football, have shown that sports in Las Vegas do work, although you don't see it as much of a culture builder where there's a lot of ingrained culture of the sport in that place. You're not going to get that in Las Vegas as much as somewhere like Seattle per se, but there's been proven fan bases that really enjoy the Las Vegas sports teams, and there's going to be a lot of money involved when it's in Vegas. So he seems quite happy with how that's working. There was a question about the Seattle team and how there's only one public bidder right now. Is this the only one that they've received? And Adam Silver was very quick to say that the only public bidder does not mean that it's the only or the only group interested, and that there's the majority of the interest has been private, and those groups have chosen to stay private. So that means that there's at least two groups of bidders who are private, um, for the Seattle team. So whoever that group is that's public right now is not guaranteed to be the one that ends up getting it. I think expansion is a very interesting idea. It's quite polarizing, actually. I find that there's a big group that says, and the NBA does not need two more teams, that the the league will become too watered down and the talent won't seem to be the same as it is right now, and I think that's a fair point. But on the other side of things, there is so much talent in the NBA right now. There's you see clips surface of G League guys all the time going off, and every single comment is talking about how's this guy not in the league. And it's because there's so much talent in the league right now. I think about my Toronto Raptors, and I'm sure that everyone who has a favorite team that they're watching a lot can think of this, but the Raptors have a guy of the name Jamison Battle, who is an incredible basketball player. When he gets on the court, he is productive. It's not just empty stats. Sorry for that. Getting back to Jamison Battle, he is a guy who, if there was an expansion draft, I am sure that he would find a way to make an impact on an NBA team and really be in the rotation. He's in the Raptors rotation most of the time, but really be a key guy on the team. And that's good for him. It's going to get him better contracts. It's going to make him have a longer NBA career. And I am totally for that. But there's also something cool about having all that talent deep on NBA benches, and on any given night, a guy who's not seeing the court very much may have to step up and can really show what they have and knock down 4 threes or something, 2 clutch ones in the fourth, and he's a hero for your team, and it's a game that you remember. That will, of course, still happen if the NBA expands. The talent today, I believe, is undeniably deeper than it ever has been. I won't get into an argument about is today's talent better than the talent in the 90s or 80s, but there are so many guys who are in and out of the league that are incredible basketball players and just can't find a role. I think that role in today's NBA, what you come in as, what do coaches and management project you as, and where they put you early on has such a large impact on your entire career trajectory. There could be two identical players. One goes to a good fit and has a coach who plays him in a certain way and utilizes him in a certain way. And then there's another one who may give the same minutes to, but doesn't want to utilize them in the same way. These guys could end up completely different. And I think that having more teams and more of these really good players given chances to show what they can do, I think is just going to open up the opportunity so much more for all of these players. And we're going to see a league where people can really show their true colors. And if they can play, they'll have a chance to show it. If they can't, they may rot at the end of the bench. But we'll definitely see less of those guys who were wondering, why can't he get minutes? But the NBA and the broader basketball community is so deep that there's always going to be guys on that fringe. And yeah, that's my point for that. But also for the fact that a 32 team league just seems right with how tennis works. You have a round of 32, a round of 16 quarterfinal. It works easily. And it will be half of the teams make the playoff or play in, half aren't, and they'll be in the lottery. It just works. It will also result in some, not relocation, but some conference and divisional changes, because Seattle and Las Vegas are not going to be, one of those teams is not going to be going to the East. So a Minnesota or Memphis is likely going to have to move over to the Eastern Conference, and that completely shakes things up. The Minnesota Timberwolves are going to be one of the better teams in the NBA for the next few years, with the duo of LaMelo Ball and Anthony Edwards and the surrounding pieces that they have and whatever they do in upcoming drafts, they're going to be one of those top tier teams in the league. And if they move over to the East, it's going to make that conference even scarier than it already got this offseason. If the Memphis Grizzlies come over, it's not the same star caliber team that the Minnesota Timberwolves have, but for longevity, they're set up very well for future success. A lot of young guys who are quality players, but maybe not max players. Think Jalen Wells, Cedric Coward, Zach Edey, these type of players. But then you also have a potentially young superstar or future superstar in Cam Boozer, and some other good pieces in that team that can really develop together. And in a couple of years, who knows what this team could be like. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out, what ownership groups come into play, and how that will result in these teams coming into the NBA, or maybe not. Adam Silver also said that he's open to both of these teams. He hopes that both of these teams will be in the NBA in the 2027, but if only one comes in, he's okay with that. And if neither city seems to have a suitable owner, he's willing to just say we'll push it back a few years and look at expansion again come 5 years or so. So a lot of news in the NBA Europe and expansion coming out will be coming out within the next year, and I'll make sure to keep an eye on that and see what's happening and keep everyone updated with that. The third thing, which is completely off topic now, he was asked a few questions about the Kawhi Leonard investigations, and I spoke on it a little bit in my breakdown video of the Kawhi Leonard trade, or the trade that has yet to happen. But if you haven't heard any of the stories yet, the whole Kawhi Leonard situation is based on the investigation of the Clippers, Kawhi Leonard, their ownership, and this nonprofit called Aspiration. And there was some promotional deals between I believe it's a nonprofit, but whatever it is, there was promotional deals with members of the Los Angeles Clippers. The company or nonprofit went under a little while ago, realized that there was some fraudulent activities going on. Whoever was at the top of that ended up being sentenced to jail time, or at least charged, was just sentenced to 14 years in prison. And there's been some talks about Kawhi Leonard being paid some money under the table through that company, or what, I don't know what it is, company, nonprofit, but not doing any public promotion for what they do. So it almost seems like the connection between the Clippers and Aspiration, and then Kawhi Leonard being paid by them for not doing anything, seems suspicious. So earlier this month, the Los Angeles Clippers engaged with the Toronto Raptors in trade talks for Kawhi Leonard, and it seemed like the trade was going to go through with no issues, but then there was a halt put on it, and there were some reports that came out that said the Raptors had conversations at the league office. They were notified that the investigation is going to continue, and if Kawhi Leonard is found to be guilty of something, whatever repercussions happen, maybe it's a suspension, the Raptors will get hit with that, and they won't have his services for a period of time. If the contract's voided, it's going to be their issue. So then allegedly the Raptors then pulled back and said, okay, let's make sure this doesn't go through yet, and we want to wait out to see the investigation play out. And at the beginning of this press conference, Adam Silver said that his timeline, he still wants the independent investigation done by an outside law firm. He hopes that they'll have their investigation completed by the end of summer still. So the end of summer, for NBA terms, that's going to be going into training camp. So there's a likely chance that Kawhi Leonard and Brandon Ingram and Grady Dick on the other side are not going to be with their teams because they really don't know if the trade is going to go through. And what Adam Silver made sure to point out in this press conference as well is that he kind of went back on those reports that the NBA office had to reach out to the Raptors about, telling them the repercussions of trading for Kawhi Leonard. He almost he didn't say this straight up, but it sounded as though he was questioning the due diligence that the Raptors put into the process. If you're trading for a guy who's under investigation, he seems to think that the Raptors were under the impression that once he's traded, the issue is no longer there and the investigation concludes. But it's an independent investigation. They're going to continue that. Adam Silver said that if the Raptors did their due diligence, they would have known this, and doesn't understand how the trade would have went this far without them knowing the repercussions of what was going to happen. So as a Raptors fan, it's kind of sketchy to think, do what's going on there and what sort of conversations were had. They may, before this news came out, thought that, okay, we understand that the investigations are ongoing. We accept the risks, but believe that the positives of trading for him now, when maybe his value is lower than usual, we think the benefits that we could get out of this outweigh the costs of potentially not having him for however many games at the beginning of the season, and whatever else comes along with it. I'm not sure the details. Or there's a world where they did think that if the trade happened, that there just no longer was going to be the investigation, and I don't believe that to be true. I think these NBA teams they do all the background research before they do anything or make any move, and that they wouldn't have been this careless to trade for a guy that very likely may not have been able to provide his services for at least a part of the season. And I think that's such a interesting point as well with Kawhi. He's getting up there in age, 36 or 37 years old. Has had injury issues for most of his career. This past season was one of his more healthy seasons, but he wasn't in the playoffs playing deep like he has in previous years. And it will be interesting to see what he will look like this upcoming season. And if he misses the first half of the season, is he going to be able to ramp up quick enough at the older age that he is for an NBA player, quickly enough to get into full game shape for the playoffs and be able to play every second day for 2.5 months straight if they make it far? And I don't know the answer to that. If I'm the Raptors, I would much rather have him from the beginning, have a healthy Kawhi Leonard right from the get-go, and load manage similar to how they did in that 2019 championship run, where throughout the season he was pretty much healthy throughout. It's just they were very specific about not playing him on back-to-backs because it would have just done too much to his body and increased the risks, spreading out when he's going to play, and then come playoff time, he's able to play many games in a row because he's in good shape, but also didn't take too much wear and tear during the season. If he's going to miss half the season or a third of the season, I don't know if they can do this. So it'll be interesting to see. I think that this trade will go through. I don't think it's going to extend all the way to summer camp. I think both parties just want to have the certainty of, okay, the trade went through and eventually we'll have our guy. And yeah, I don't see a world where they're in training camp and then eventually the trade gets taken back and then Brandon Ingram and Grady Dick have to be rerouted somewhere else. And every team is going to know that the Raptors aren't going to bring them back. So their value is going to be in the toilet, and it's really bad all around for the Raptors. For the Clippers, I think it's a tough situation. They might just tell Kawhi, yeah, you got to come back, buddy, because no other team is going to go for him at that point. Who knows? There's a lot up in the air right now. The last point, and this goes into a little bit what I was talking about in the video last weekend about the collective bargaining agreement, but a specific different point about it that I'll discuss more in this weekend's deep dive, episode 2 into the collective bargaining agreement. Don't miss that. But he talked about the second apron, and that's been the buzzword in the NBA for the last little bit. It seems like if you're an NBA analyst, if you say the word second apron, people are going to open their ears a little bit more and say, "Oh, what's going on here?" And of course, some questions were asked about this and competitive balance and seeing 8 different champions in 8 years. And the first question was asking about the consequences of the second apron and are they what the NBA set out to do with it. And Adam Silver told not a story, but said that this NBA Finals was between the New York Knicks, who is a huge market, a huge fan base, a huge city. Everything to do with the New York Knicks is grand and big market. And then you have them play against the San Antonio Spurs, who are one of the smaller markets, but known to be a basketball place. They have an alien in Victor Wembanyama and a very young team, very different than that of the New York Knicks. And both of those teams squared off after a grueling playoffs for the San Antonio Spurs, a bit more of a simple one for the New York Knicks. But even with those completely different backgrounds of the team construction and how they got there, they both made it to the NBA Finals. And particularly that the story in the NBA Finals was never that it was a big market versus a small market. It was the city of New York and Jalen Brunson being the captain of all of that. And then Victor Wembanyama basically representing the world. And I think that's pretty cool. It's still, in a sense, you're looking at New York as a big market, but they never really used that language. It was the city of New York got behind it. San Antonio didn't have that same the city get behind it feel, but it was almost New York was this big bad guy. But they never said that the Spurs were the David to New York's Goliath. And he loves that. He thinks every team getting a chance every few years to make a small push is good for the game. He seems to think that having a small championship window where you can go over the second apron for a year or two, but after that, there's going to be a lot of negative consequences for your team building for multiple years, that it's going to be very difficult for any team to stay above it or even compete for a number of years at a time. And it's going to allow these smaller markets with owners who may not have as deep of pockets relatively, they'll still be able to make a push here and there when they want to. And I think that's good for the game. I think that we're going to have to look at the NBA in a very different light. One thing I always see, this isn't totally related, but when the draft comes around every year and there's analysis about these players and they talk about player A gets drafted to organization B and he could be their starting shooting guard for the next 10 years. And I hear that comment and I almost cringe now because I think about how the NBA is and the Toronto Raptors, who are a team known for development, known for not being able to bring in big free agents, completely flipped their team from the championship one in just 6 years. There wasn't one player, this past season, there wasn't one player from the championship roster on the team. And now that if Kawhi comes back, he will be the only one after only being there for one season. There won't be the same level of this player can stick around on this team forever just because he is known to be this city's guy. Teams are forced to make really tough decisions with the guys that they like. We saw it with Lou Dort in Oklahoma City. They had to get rid of him just for money reasons. They did the same for Aaron Wiggins, who saved basketball. the incredible speech after their NBA championship. Isaiah Joe, a beloved player there as well. The New York Knicks had to get rid of Mitchell Robinson after he had one of the biggest rebounds of the entire playoffs and made life very difficult for the entire San Antonio Spurs team. They had to let him go. And that's going to continue to happen. So there will be competitive balance. Every team is going to have their chance at being good if they draft well. But I think there will be some sort of unintended consequence where it's hard for fans to get behind certain players just because they don't know if they're going to be around for a long time. And it's going to be hard to develop those outside relationships with the players and really feel like that this guy is a this city guy. Just like Chris Boucher felt like a Raptor. I feel like Norman Powell felt like a Raptor. He then goes to the Clippers and then, or he goes to the Blazers and then the Clippers and then the Heat, and now he's gone somewhere else this year. The Bulls, I think. All these, not, I'll say borderline all-star to good players are going to have a very difficult time, one, getting big contracts because those are going to be saved for the top of the top max guys who are making 30 to 35% of the cap. And then there's going to be a big drop off where a lot of guys are not going to get paid what they probably should based on their production. And there's going to be a couple guys who are making 30, maybe 20. Maybe you have an older veteran guy who's making 30 to 35% of the cap. He's your star player. You have a guy on his second contract, think of Scotty Barnes or something like that, making 25% of the cap or somewhere around there. And then the rest of the roster is going to be a mid-level exception guy, maybe a couple $15-10 million taller guys. And then it's going to be a lot of rookies, a lot of guys on their first contract and minimums. And those players who aren't good enough to get the max extensions, they're probably not going to earn 20% of the cap. I don't think NBA teams see that as valuable anymore. I think that it's going to be, you got your max guy at 30 or 35, and then it's just going to be a drop off to like 10, 15%. And it's going to be difficult, and these middle of the road players are going to want to make more money, and there's going to be few teams to be able to do that. It's likely not going to be their own. There's a team like the Kings this year who just happens to have a bit of money and they have to spend it. They go out and maybe they don't overpay, but they'll pay a little bit more for that middle of the road guy. And then you're unable to build that connection with them. This was a bit more of a rant of team building right there. But I think that on the competitive balance side of things, this new CBA is doing its job. But I think from a fan perspective and even a player perspective making money, it makes things quite difficult. It would be interesting to be in the room when these negotiations are going on between the NBA Players Association and the NBA, because when I look at this current collective bargaining agreement, they want, first of all, the Players Association wants the players to get paid. And in a sense, they did that. There's very high max contracts. Guys are going to be able to be making $70 million. And that's good for them. But it's a very small minority of the NBA. The impact for the other players, like I said, is quite negative in the other direction. Minimum salaries are getting bumped up. That's good. But it's hard to be a good player in the NBA right now, even a great player, just because people like Jalen Duren, who are fighting for more of a contract, guys like Peyton Watson, he's going through a similar thing right now. Bennedict Mathurin, these are all good NBA players who think they deserve a certain amount of money, and maybe they do in most years. But with the way that things are set up, they are going to end up getting underpaid. And this is a negative from the Players Association eyes. I just wonder how they balance this with Jalen Duren and these type of players likely going to be underpaid, and a player like Donovan Mitchell getting 35% of the cap and getting generational wealth 20 times more than a lot of NBA players will ever see. And it's just an interesting thing to think about, and something that the NBA definitely should consider going forward. I would like a world, I'm not a cap expert by any means, but a world where maybe the max contracts are reduced a little bit as a percentage of cap. I see the NBA doing very well financially going forward. Maybe the actual cap itself can increase, but the percentage that these top players can be making will kind of reduce, so it'll be around the same amount of salaries. But then this will allow other players to get closer to their fair market wage without any restrictions about, well, if I have to pay my superstar this amount, two other players aren't going to be able to make anything, and I'm going to have to trade them, or I'm going to have to ruin my relationship with them and try to bring them back on a smaller contract. So I'll talk more about all of that, the apron system, the how bird rights work, the different exceptions, all of that stuff in this weekend's video. Try to get it down into more of a narrative so you can understand how the salary cap system is built, talk more about why they're doing it this way, and then how it actually works in practice with some real world examples. So I'm looking forward to filming that over the next couple of days. I hope you'll enjoy that as well. I hope you enjoyed this episode right here of The Late Whistle. Ended up being quite similar to what I was doing yesterday. Ended up just being my thoughts on different issues that somewhat relate to what Adam Silver was saying. I hope it was somewhat enjoyable, and maybe let me know what you think about some of these issues as well, and if your opinions differ from what I say. I'm very interested to hear what others think of these sort of things in the NBA. I thank you for watching again. I will hopefully see you this weekend in the next one, and I appreciate you watching. See ya.